So now that we have covered emotional intelligence, looking at the ability to manage and use emotions in the workplace to really delve into what drives staff and what motivates them, we're going to look at empowerment. Now, empowerment is where you give employees the belief, the ability, the freedom to succeed on their own. And as we discuss this, we're going to talk about Steve Jobs again. And Steve Jobs was, in his first time at Apple, very much a control freak and wanted to micromanage everything and take charge, or at least oversee every single task that was done at Apple, even the design of the tiny little screws that went into the computers, etc. And then once he resigned from Apple, when he was forced to resign in 1985, he went and worked at a computer graphics company and founded the animation studio Pixar. I'm sure you are familiar with Pixar. And whilst he was working at Pixar, he developed a lot of leadership practices that he didn't have when he was working at Apple the first time around. And one of the big leadership practices that he, in a sense, developed over his time working at Pixar was the ability to empower his employees. And what empowerment means, what it means for you as a leader, as a manager in the company that you work for, is empowering, is giving staff freedom and responsibility for tasks. So no longer are we just a manager that's barking orders down and people are just carrying out tasks that they've been instructed to do. We're giving them objectives and giving them the freedom to fulfill those objectives by choosing their own approach to fulfill those objectives. So it mitigates the need to micromanage at every step of the way. And an empowered employee, these are the characteristics of an empowered employee, has the opportunity to make their own decisions. So if you are a manager and you want employees to increase productivity, if you are just managing, if you are just giving orders, you're just saying, right, employee A, you're going to do X, Y, Z to improve productivity. Employee B, you're going to do A, B, C to improve productivity, etc. If you are empowering your employees, you are coming to them and you are saying, right, we need to improve productivity by 10%. I'd like you to improve your productivity. You give them the power to assess their own work, to see what they need to do, for them to think of ways in which they can improve productivity. You give them an objective and they take the steps to fulfill that objective rather than you giving them the steps. An empowered employee also has the right resources and the right support as well. You have to provide them with support when they require it. Just because you've empowered them to make their own decision doesn't mean you can completely remove yourself from the situation. An empowered employee needs to know that they have their leader there to provide support when it is required. An empowered employee is also in a working environment where they feel their ambitions and opinions are valued as well. They feel valued, they feel listened to. So this is going back to some of the things we spoke about in the earlier section on social skills and empathy, etc. An employee will have a lot of knowledge about the job. They will have a lot more knowledge probably about the day-to-day runnings of their job than the person that leads the company or the person that leads the team even. So their opinions and their feelings about what is successful, what is useful for those day-to-day operations is important, and you must listen to them. And this is why you should be empowering your staff. This is the benefit for you as a manager, as a leader. An empowered employee is generally more creative, they are more motivated, they're more productive as a result of it. And as a result of being more productive, your team is performing more effectively, producing better results to a higher quality, etc. So that is reflecting well on you as a manager, as a leader. It also offers them the chance to become more skilled, more developed, gain more experience, so they are a more beneficial member of the team. They are contributing more, they are adding more value to the team. And it's also a case where you're reducing turnover as well. They're developing skills, they're more satisfied, they're more likely to stay at the company for longer. So there are a lot of benefits to you as a manager for making sure your employee is empowered, because they will be a more effective employee in the long run. An employee that is just told what to do time and time again will never develop, will never get any better. It's like that saying, you give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. You teach a man to fish and he'll never go hungry. If you are just giving fish on a daily basis, they will eat that fish on that daily basis, but they'll never learn how to feed themselves, so to speak, to use that expression. So, with this in mind, how does it relate to those effective leadership characteristics? How can you become a better leader? These four main things that we're constantly referring back to, what makes a good leader. How does empowering staff help you with these four characteristics? Well, let's take a look at them, starting with responsible, being a responsible leader, feeling responsible for the tasks, the objectives, and the staff that you work for and work with. Well, if you are empowering your staff, they're more likely to feel respected, more likely to feel valued, feel that they are contributing to the organization. And then they're going to have more trust in you, more respect for you, and also they'll build stronger relationships within the team, because the attitude that you give to staff will be reflected in their relationships with each other. If the leader trusts the team members will trust each other. So given that they trust you and that they'll work for you and they'll come along with you on this vision, etc., you are able to be responsible for them better. You're able to work with them more effectively with more trust. With regards to being motivational and inspiring, it was actually a study carried out in 2016 by the Society for Human Resource Management that found that 70% of employees feel that being empowered is very important to having engagement in their work. And engagement basically is a word that summarizes how switched on they are, how likely they are to work hard, etc., how likely they are to want to hit their goals. If you are engaged in your work, it means you are motivated by it, you want to get on, you want to succeed. So if empowered employees are more engaged, then empowered employees are likely to be more bought into what you are suggesting, more bought into the big picture that you're promoting for the company, and more likely to be motivated. So if you empower them, you give them responsibility, you are giving them the onus to be motivated, to self-motivate, to complete their task, because you are showing trust in them by giving them responsibility. With regards to decisiveness, by empowering your staff, it's likely that they will be able to take on some of the lower level decision making. And this means that it frees up your time to work on the larger, longer term decisions as the manager, as the leader. And with regard to being a visionary, giving your employees power, empowering them, gives them a sense of ownership over the work. So in reality, your individual team, they might not be contributing a huge amount to the overarching goals of the company, particularly if it's a massive company. But if they have more power over the work, if they are doing it their own way, etc., then it feels to them like they're contributing more. They're going to feel more responsible for the work they're doing. They'll feel more responsible for ensuring that the goals of the team are met. So again, going back to this full circle argument of being a good leader by being responsible, motivating, decisive, and visionary, then by empowering your staff, you are becoming a better leader. You're helping yourself to become a better leader. Your staff are going to respect you more. They're going to be more motivated. It allows you to be a visionary, and it allows you to make more decisive decisions. So how would we actually go about empowering our staff? What are some methods we can use in order to empower our staff? Remember that empowering is part of effective leadership, so it's important that you practice empowerment in your role as a leader. And there are a couple of things that we're going to look at, a couple of elements, different ways in which you can empower your staff, put it into practice. And the first one we're going to look at is delegation. Now, delegation is actually slightly different to empowerment, but it might be the first step that you take towards empowering your staff, because delegation is about passing tasks and decisions on to other employees. So as the leader of the team, as the manager of the team, you might take some of your tasks and give them to members of your team. Now, this is different from empowering, because when you empower staff, you are giving them the responsibility. You are completely handing over responsibility for a particular task, for a particular goal. With delegation, it's slightly different because the responsibility still stays with the person that is delegating. If you delegate a task that you are expected to do to a member of your team, you are still ultimately responsible for that work being done. So if they do your job to an unsatisfactory level, then it's ultimately you that is still responsible. The person that you were doing it for will say, well, this wasn't done right. Did you not do it right, or did someone in your team not do it right and you didn't check that they were doing it right? So it is a bit different, but it perhaps is the first step towards empowering. You would perhaps trial some staff out by delegating to them first, and if they can prove that you can delegate work to them effectively, then you might look to empower them by giving them some of their own work to do. So, as a first step towards empowerment, you might consider delegation, but there are a few things that you will need to do when you are delegating. You, of course, will need to perhaps supervise someone more closely when you are delegating them compared with empowering, so that they can learn, they can expand their skill sets. Because when you are delegating, you are still providing perhaps a bit more support to them, meaning that they're better equipped to take on more responsibility in the future. It also gives you the opportunity to see how they perform, to see whether that employee is ready to be given additional responsibility. Because giving an employee too much responsibility too early can leave them completely out of their depth. They perhaps won't complete the task effectively, or they won't complete it to the required standard. And also, it will provide motivation, because the employee, even if they're new to the task, they'll still get some benefit from doing it. They'll still be doing something different that's giving them some enjoyment. They'll be developing some new skills. So they're likely to still be motivated by it, because it still proves to them that you are valuing them, you are trusting their ability. Even if they haven't been given the full responsibility, it's just a delegation where they're still being supervised, it still shows them that they are moving in the right direction. In the same way that it's the first step you might take towards empowering a staff member, they'll see it as their first step towards being given responsibility, being given that empowerment by you as the leader. Second one we're going to look at is mentoring and coaching. Now, mentoring and coaching are approaches to development. And often they involve one-to-one meetings with staff members, having conversations about how to improve their knowledge, improve their performance, improve their general skill set. And you can provide mentoring, or you can coach them. And again, there is a bit of a difference between the two. But ultimately, it's still more about giving them responsibility, allowing them to work more independently. So as a mentor, you are providing them with help. You are challenging them to improve their performance. You're then working with them to create a plan to improve their skills, to improve their performance. So that's going to build their confidence and make sure that they can take on more responsibility going forward. Also proves to you that they are able to take on that responsibility. Now, coaching is slightly different to mentoring. In mentoring, you have more of a mentor-mentee relationship where you are providing them with a lot of help, setting a lot of specific tasks for them and specific goals. With coaching, you are challenging them to find their own solution to a problem. Whereas a mentor, you're saying, right, we've got to deal with this. I think we should deal with it in this way. Do you think you are able to do that, etc.? Whereas with coaching, you're saying, well, there's a bit of a problem here. What do you suggest? And you learn about them by monitoring their responses, seeing how they are working, etc. You're then working with them to help them design their own plan. Your job as a coach is to ask the right questions and to provide advice when necessary or if they ask for it. So with regards to the differences between mentoring and coaching, when you are coaching, the individual has a bit more ownership of the development process. So sort of looking at a bit of a step-by-step here towards empowerment. The first step might be delegating some work to them. The next step might be mentoring them. Then the next step after that could be coaching them. And once you have been able to coach them effectively, you're really confident in their abilities, then you might give them that full empowerment, that full responsibility. But the one thing that is needed for effective empowerment is something that is known as psychological safety. Now, psychological safety is, as the name would suggest, the ability for staff, or a situation where staff feel safe. They feel like they are able to take decisions. They feel that they are able to make their own way. They are able to achieve tasks and goals how they see fit. Because empowerment is only going to be successful if an employee feels safe. If they feel that they're going to get criticized for every single thing they come up with, it's going to affect their confidence. If they feel that their colleagues or their leader or anyone else is going to have a go at them if everything goes wrong, then they are not going to be confident. They're not going to feel safe making those decisions. So what is important for you as a leader is to create an environment where there is psychological safety, where people can contribute, they can work, they can make decision without criticism of the consequences. Now, of course, if they go off track or they make a mistake, they need feedback, but it has to be constructive. It has to be effective advice to allow them to improve in the future. It's not a case of, right, I'm going to give you all this responsibility. If you make one tiny, tiny mistake, I'm going to come on down on you like a ton of bricks. People are going to panic in that situation. They're not going to feel safe. They're not going to be confident making a decision, and they'll be completely demotivated. And therefore, the empowerment will be a complete failure. They have to feel like they can take a chance. They have to feel like they are responsible for it, but they won't be unjustly criticized if it all goes wrong. So those are some of the elements of empowerment and step-by-step process of how you can perhaps empower your employees, and you can trial them and you can give them various degrees of help until they are ready for it. But how does this specifically relate to the finance industry that you may find yourself in if you're working in practice or if you're working in a finance function? Well, empowerment does exist in finance, and the degree to which you as a financial leader can empower your staff will be influenced by the type of work that you are doing. Because if there is no real scope to empower staff, then it's important to recognize that, because you will then need to motivate them in other ways. But if you can give them more responsibility, if you can empower them, that in itself is a way to motivate them. So, for example, take a purchase ledger team in a finance department. It's a very process-driven job, processing invoices, processing purchase orders and bank reconciliation statements, etc. But because of this very structured, process-driven nature of this job, there's not that much agency. You have a set task and a set way of doing it. There's not really any freedom to make decisions or decide how it's going to be carried out, etc. So there's very limited opportunity for you, if you are leading a purchase ledger team, to empower your staff. So in that case, you need to motivate them in other ways by setting perhaps more specific targets to them and empathizing with them and looking for ways in which they can gain more enjoyment from the job that they are doing. However, if you're working on, say, a consultancy team, where you're going to have lots of different jobs from client to client and working together on different projects, coming up with solutions, then there is an environment where you can have agency over the job. There will be different things that different team members can do. There will be ways in which they can come up with solutions to problems, etc. So here, the lead consultant should make sure that everyone feels comfortable contributing ideas. They have that psychological safety. There might also be the opportunity for that lead consultant to empower at least the experienced members of the team, giving them responsibility for particular projects or at least particular elements of the different projects. And as a result, the members of that team, the members of that consultancy team are going to be more motivated because they're going to have the opportunity to develop their own skills, to feel like they are contributing to the team. So let's put all of this into practice now in an exercise. And for this exercise, I'd like you to think about everything we've covered so far in this section of the video and apply it to the following exercise. So let's read through it now. And we're focusing on someone called Emma and her team, and they're responsible for analyzing, identifying, and communicating financial information. And this financial information is used for budgets and assisting senior managers as they make decisions. Now, one of Emma's management accountants has been part of the team for 6 months, and Emma thinks that they are ready to take on some more responsibility. They have previously worked in public practice, but this is their first job working in the finance department of a manufacturing company. And so what our question is here is to look at some particular steps towards empowering this employee and see whether they are suitable. So let's take a look at them. The first is the employee is being put in charge of preparing the production budget. So we feel they're ready for responsibility, so we're going to put them in charge of preparing the production budget. The second is giving that employee the task of investigating and recommending a new data visualization software for the finance team. The third is the employee is being given a task to monitor the team's progress for Emma and make decisions as to whether the work needs to be redistributed to ensure that deadlines are hit. And the final one is for Emma to ask the employee what their goals and aspirations are in the organization at their first appraisal. So what I would like you to do is pause the video, read through this scenario, also think about everything we have covered and see which of the following would be appropriate. In other words, which would be giving too much responsibility and which would be giving the right amount of responsibility. It's not a case of there being one that is and the rest aren't. It could be that several are appropriate levels of responsibility and a couple that aren't. So pause the video, take a look at that, come back, and we'll go through the solution together. Okay, welcome back. Let's take a look at the solution, starting with the first step, which was to put the employee in charge of the production budget. Now, given that the employee has only been working at the company for a few months, and before then they were part of public practice and wouldn't have been involved with production budgets, chances are this is far too much responsibility to give the employee, to give them the responsibility of the entire production budget. Given that they won't have the knowledge, they won't have the experience, it will simply be too much for them to do, particularly to the required standard. So what Emma should probably do here is, rather than give them responsibility for the entire production budget, is give them some responsibility over a small element of the budgetary process and gradually increase this responsibility as they become more familiar with the company, more familiar with the process. Now on to the second one, giving the employee a task of investigating and recommending a new data visualization software for the finance team. Now, this would be a far more suitable step for this employee, provided that clear guidelines are given on what the needs of the finance team are with regards to the software. They should be able to take on the responsibility for this task and carry out the research that they need to do. Now, the employee has not been fully empowered here, but they have been given the responsibility to at least make a recommendation rather than the decision. The decision will still ultimately be Emma's. She'll have the final say on the software, but here the employee has at least been involved in the decision-making process. On to option 3, which is to task them with monitoring the team's progress and making decisions whether the work needs to be redistributed to ensure the deadlines are hit. So, of course, this would definitely empower the employee to be able to monitor the team, monitor the progress, and determine how tasks are allocated, etc. But this is something that Emma should be doing. Emma is the team leader and should not be handing off the responsibility of leading the team to someone else, particularly someone that has only been involved with the company for a few months. So, unless Emma is absent for whatever reason, she should always be leading the team and doing things that are the responsibility of the team leader. So that would not be a suitable action to take with regards to empowering the employee. And finally, option 4, asking the employee what their goals, their aspirations are in the organization. So whilst asking the employee about their goals, aspirations is not necessarily empowering as such, it's not an actual act of empowering, but by doing this, Emma can ensure the employee does want to take on responsibility. They can find out some useful information about what their career aspirations are, what they ultimately want, whether they actually want responsibility, whether they want decision-making power. And so this will help with empowerment in the future. It's not empowering right here and now, but it's a suitable step to take towards empowering the employee in that role. So in summary, the second option would be a suitable step, as it would be clear guidelines. There would be at least something they could take some responsibility for. And the fourth option would be useful, particularly for the future, because it would be taking the first step towards empowerment. But the other two are simply too much responsibility at this point in the employee's career. And also one of the options is actually Emma's role, and she should not be delegating that. That is her role as the team leader. So now it's time to return to your workbook and to reflect on what you have learned in this section and answer some of the following questions. First of all, how much scope is there for empowering employees in your team? So the team that you manage or the team that you are in, if you are currently being managed by someone, is there actually any scope for empowering? Are you in a very process-driven team, or is there scope for empowerment, scope for making decisions, etc.? And also think, are there any employees in your team that are currently empowered in any way? And if so, how are they empowered and how would you go about empowering them? Can you perhaps look to mentor them or coach them or delegate some of the responsibilities that you have? And finally, think about your team, think about whether they could be empowered, and think, would there be actually any benefits of doing it? Are there particular staff that you think they would really benefit from being empowered? And are there others that you think, well, they do not have any aspirations to take on responsibility or leadership and therefore might actually react negatively because they don't want that responsibility, they don't want that power? Because as a leader, it's very important that you identify which employees want the responsibility and give them responsibility accordingly, and vice versa. So that brings us to the end of the section on empowerment and also the end of this second part of our leadership principles you need for success videos. Hope you now have a good idea of why it's so important that you identify which employees want that responsibility and how you can provide them with that responsibility. And also why it's important to give them that responsibility, that empowerment, because it will help them to become a more creative, a more motivated employee that's less likely to leave. We also looked at the ways in which you can empower staff through delegation, through mentoring and coaching, but do make sure that you always provide that environment where there is that psychological safety, because that is so important. No one is going to feel motivated, feel confident if they feel that every single minor mistake they make is going to be heavily criticized and scrutinized. And I hope you also took away some key learnings to include in your workbook there to help you improve as a leader, because it goes back to this whole idea of improving yourself as a leader, being a more responsible, more decisive, more visionary, more inspiring leader. And also it'll go into that whole idea of self-awareness and self-assessment that is needed for emotional intelligence as well. So thank you very much for watching, and please join me for the next video.